continue to participate fully in the entire process to its logical conclusion as stated in Section 226 of the 1997 Constitution. This message is brought to you by the National Council for Civic Education and the United Nations Development Programme.
My little boy, he can be shy sometimes. As a mom, I know that friendship just needs a little help. From great tasting Tiara, is rich in vitamin C, low in sugar, and so easy to make, with a big burst of fruity flavor that children just love. Tiara, there's a smile in every sip.
Coronavirus spreads worldwide, we at Bell Aqua would like to encourage everyone to 1. Wash your hands thoroughly and often. 2. Avoid touching your mouth, nose and eyes. 3. Exercise social distancing. 4. Avoid large crowds where possible. 5. When you feel feverish or unwell, please visit the nearest health facility or call the emergency line 1025 from any network. This message is brought to you by Bell Aqua Purified Water. Drink pure, live safe.
mbir mi tànn sa bu la neex la te boo tànnee li gën lu gën rek ngay am. jigéen nag jonge moo ko war, jonge lool sax, jonge si bépp boor. te comme que lii ma tànn mooy li gën, moom it saa su ne lépp lu muy tànn rek mooy li gën. cey sama vidéo sama lingeer gi yaay sama chef. li nga tànn dafay leer nañ ak
Elburg mayonnaise ak butter ñu leen ko indil the Tedungal Trading sa 73 Liman Street Banjul. Mun ngeen la call si 422 5581 7911 285. Tedungal ñu leen ko indil Elburg mayonnaise ak butter fépp si réew mi.
Following the release of the draft constitution, it is imperative that Gambians take ownership and participate fully in all the remaining constitutional building processes leading to a referendum that will usher in the new constitution and a third republic of the Gambia. The National Council for Civic Education, NCCE, reminds the public that the bill for an act to promulgate the Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia 2020 has now been completed and published in the Gazette. A second publication of the bill in the Gazette shall occur by end of August 2020 and shall be introduced in the National Assembly by the second week of September. The bill in the second and third reading respectively shall be supported by 3/4 or 75% of all National Assembly members. The bill shall then be referred by the Speaker to the Independent Electoral Commission for the referendum to be held within 6 months. In the referendum, 50% of eligible voters must participate and 75% of which must vote for the bill. The bill shall finally be signed by the President within 7 days after certification from the Independent Electoral Commission. Therefore, the National Council for Civic Education encourages the public to keep the momentum and continue to participate fully in the entire process to its logical conclusion as stated in Section 226 of the 1997 Constitution. This message is brought to you by the National Council for Civic Education and the United Nations Development Programme.
My little boy, he can be shy sometimes. As a mom, I know that friendship just needs a little help. From great tasting tiara, is rich in vitamin C, low in sugar, and so easy to make, with a big burst of fruity flavor that children just love. Tiara, there's a smile in every sip.
Coronavirus spreads worldwide, we at Bell Aqua would like to encourage everyone to 1. Wash your hands thoroughly and often. 2. Avoid touching your mouth, nose and eyes. 3. Exercise social distancing. 4. Avoid large crowds where possible. 5. When you feel feverish or unwell, please visit the nearest health facility or call the emergency line 1025 from any network. This message is brought to you by Bell Aqua Purified Water. Drink pure, live safe.
mbir mi tànn sa bu la neex la te boo tànnee li gën lu gën rek ngay am jigéen nag jonge moo ko war jonge lool sax jonge si bépp boor te comme que lii ma tànn mooy li gën moom it saa su ne lépp lu muy tànn rek mooy li gën cey sama vidéo sama lingeer gi yaay sama chef li nga tànn dafay leer nañ ak
Elberg mayonnaise ak butter ñu leen ko indil the Tedungal Trading sa 73 Liman Street Banjul mun nga call si 422 5581 7911 285 Tedungal ñu leen ko indil Elberg mayonnaise ak butter fépp si réew mi.
Following the release of the draft constitution, it is
Hello and welcome to Paradise TV, to this. I'm trying to get used to this. I don't know if you hear me loud enough. I hope you do. We'd like to welcome you to this program that we decided to host
after a series of intervention, and recently regarding especially young women. I'd like to begin this program with a quote from Jama Bala Sise. According to her, just because you have a microphone doesn't mean you should be talking. If you do not have a microphone, doesn't mean you should be silent either. So today we're going to start a conversation which some people will find it very difficult to have and or host in the first instance. But I do believe we must begin this conversation. We cannot continue as Gambians to just keep putting things under the carpets forever. As a parent, a few days ago, I couldn't sleep when I heard a 15-year-old was raped and had a child. A day or two later, I had new information that a 7-year-old was also raped. And then, yesterday we heard a very high senior lawyer in the country has also been charged for the same. We can no longer keep quiet and silent. So today the program is dedicated to women, and I am just moderating it, and I believe us men should be listening to these ladies here today to tell their stories. So I'll begin introducing my guest. On my far right is Jama, a feminist and a communications professional. And next to her is Bafu Jeng, a senior state counsel with the Ministry of Justice. And to my left is Jaha Dukure, an activist and UN ambassador for women. These are the ladies. We were supposed to have a representative from the Ministry of Children and Women's Affairs, who unfortunately is not with us today. So Jama, we will begin with you. As a feminist, how do you see the Gambia?
Thank you very much, Haruna. I'm glad to be here today on this platform. I just wanted to say I do not think we're starting the conversation here. What's happening is an amplification of conversations that have already been happening, led by mostly women, led by organizations focused on the promotion of the fulfillment and the respect of women. And I think it is important that we take the conversation into as many spaces as possible, and this is one of those. From a feminist perspective and relevant to the subject that we're discussing today, I believe we might be at a turning point in the Gambia. We did not have this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. There are more conversations happening. There are more people speaking up. But there's also a lot of violence. There is also a lot of work that needs to be done. There is a lot that we need to recognize. There's a lot that we need to accept first. There's a problem we need to identify. We need to identify the roots of a problem and then work together to understand how each one of us contributes to that problem and what role we can play towards ending that problem. And so for me, I stand in a position where I work sometimes with victims and survivors of sexual violence, but I'm also in a position where I work with people who are committed to standing up for these victims, to amplifying their voices, to supporting them. And so sometimes I am torn between desperation and hopelessness, and other times I have a lot of hope for what is coming up in the future because of the work that is happening. And so I believe, like I said, since last year the conversation has grown. There have been so many more voices, even though the voices are also polarized on two different extreme ends. But there has been that conversation over the past year. And I think what it signals for us is that, like you have said, there's been a very loud silence. It is time to break that silence. It is time to listen to what women are saying. It is time to stop dismissing our voices and our stories and understand how, through listening, we can now determine what steps we'll take to move forward and also what roles each one of us can play. So this is the position in which I stand. It's one where I understand the gravity of our current situation, but also one where I can hold a bit of hope for what lies ahead.
Thank you, Jama. And we're going to go straight to you, Jaha. I mean, you've worked with women over the years, and I am sure you've come in contact with especially rape, violence against women. How would you say, in your own words, is the status of women and girls in the Gambia?
I think as someone who grew up in this country, this is my experience and not speaking for everyone in the Gambia, but growing up, I don't think I know a girl who has not been sexually molested or harassed in her life at least once. And that is the reality that most women in this country face. A lot of times we don't think that a man touching our boobs or a man touching our private areas or even our children, we don't have these conversations with our daughters. But these are the realities that women and girls are facing in the Gambia, and I'm glad that this conversation is something that we're having now. I mean, for me, rape has been something that has been very difficult for me to talk about, mainly because of just my own personal experiences in life as well as my own life history. And rape and sexual violence has always been something that triggers me. And as a result of that, I think even when I see it online, making a comment about it has always been something that has been very, very difficult for me because it is very personal. And, you know, but then I realized that I am not alone in that silence. But I'm also glad that there has been so many amazing voices in the Gambia that have been championing the issue of sexual violence and especially rape and being there for survivors and being as outspoken as they are, such as Jama and others who have led this conversation online. So yes, the state of women in this country is very sad because when something bad happens to a woman, instead of us rallying behind that woman and supporting her, a lot of times we victimize that same person and blame them for what has happened to them. And not only are they stigmatized, but they're made to seem as if somehow they brought this on themselves, and which makes it hard for you to talk about, because every time you say something, someone either says that you're looking for attention or you're lying or there's an ulterior motive as to why. Imagine as a woman being violated and the people that are supposed to support you and the community that is supposed to rally behind you questioning your intention for having the courage to speak out and say something.
Well, we coming to you, Bafu. We understand at the Ministry of Justice there are also steps being taken to protect women, children, and other violations, not just rape. So we wanted to have an overview of what your ministry and your department in particular is doing with regards to supporting women and girls.
Thank you, Haruna. It's a pleasure being here. I think this is way overdue, and we are very much appreciative of this platform. I wish to, first of all, before talking about the Ministry of Justice, I would talk about the obligations of government, because the ministry as part of government, and it's important to, first of all, highlight the obligation of government in terms of protecting women and children. Haruna, it's the government of the Gambia is obligated in various international treaties. We talk about the regional bodies, we talk about the UN body at the international level. And the Gambia has signed so many treaties, has ratified those treaties and domesticated them into national laws. These laws are what we put in place in order to protect and promote the rights of women and children. And talking about those laws, we have there's in place the Women's Act of 2010. There's in place the Domestic Violence Act of 2013. There is in place the Sexual Offences Act of 2013. And there is in place also the Children's Act of 2005. Of course, some of these laws have been amended over the years. But it's important to know that government alone cannot do it. And that is why we need the support of other complementary bodies, and especially the voices of these activists who are out there, and they're the ones that are meeting. They meet with the grassroots. They're the ones that started from where it happens, and they come to us and they support those victims. At the level of the Ministry of Justice, we are responsible for prosecution of cases. And the prosecution of these cases pass through the Ministry of Justice from the police, Of course, the police are the ones that are responsible for investigation. And of course, the police can also investigate when cases are brought to them. They may not even be aware of the existence of these cases, but with the help and support of the activists, sometimes that's where you see the co-relationship. They can forward cases to the police, or they can engage the police in terms of investigations, and then the police would investigate and provide those cases to the Minister of Justice. Then the Minister of Justice would review the cases, and then if there is evidence to support the facts that are in place, those cases will be forwarded to court for prosecution. Now, we've seen over the years that cases, there are, of course, it's the truth. We have backlog of cases in court. We have the community losing the trust they have in the prosecution system. We have seen convicts being allowed to go from court. You see a convict is discharged. You see an accused person is discharged. And also you see sometimes the delay in the prosecution of these cases. And all these amounts to the lack of trust that the community has in the system. So therefore, the Ministry of Justice has established a child rights unit, which of course supports other institutions in terms of awareness raising, in terms of sensitization with respect to the laws, meeting the law enforcement officers, meeting the community leaders, meeting the youth groups, women groups, and so on. But despite that, in 2018, under the leadership of the Attorney General, there was formed a unit called SGBB, and that unit is meant to support the police, is meant to support also even the ministry itself in terms of prioritizing cases of SGBB in the prosecution. And this unit is made up of different members. We have members from the police, we have members from the social Department of Social Welfare, as well as from the Ministry of Justice. Now, what this unit is meant to do is to make sure that we also monitor cases and we monitor cases and support the police in their investigation, in order to make sure that when the cases come back to us, all the gaps that we have in there are fully breached. And then we proceed to court in order to prosecute these cases. So at the level of the ministry, that is what we do in terms of cases. We prosecute cases. But that's not the only thing that we are engaged upon, because we support other institutions in terms of the awareness raising, in terms of, especially with respect to the existing laws.
Thank you. Jama, we're coming back to you, but it would seem from what Jaha was saying and her, that it's very difficult, because there's been a culture that's already created where a young girl may not see it inappropriate to be touched in certain manner, because it happens so often. And then we know a lot of men also groom children in a certain way that you don't see the inappropriateness of certain approaches. How do you now, as advocates, educate the general public, in particular young girls, to see this? I mean, is there some sort of movement, some form of education, some form of awareness creation that will show the inappropriateness of such?
I think all of our different organizations have been doing this. And one of the things we need to understand is that, so we're organizations, we're working on women's rights, we're not focused on just one area. And we also understand how there are interlinkages between all of these different violations and forms of violence that women face. So our approach has always been, deal with this holistically, deal with this in a comprehensive manner, so you're not dealing with one issue and then you're done with it and then move to the next and then you're done with it. Because at the end of the day, it's back to what I have said. It's not about dealing with single issues, it's really dealing with the root. And it comes back to the points that have been raised. It's understanding, and I always say, we cannot discuss sexual and gender-based violence without first interrogating the system of patriarchy within which we live. And you say patriarchy, you have so many men who come and attack you because they just do not want to hear that word. And the explanation for that is simple. They are the main benefactors of the patriarchal system. Now, everything that happens is based on that system. It is a system that gives men power to do what they want. It is a system that does not hold men accountable, and boys. It is a system that tells men, you can do whatever you want to women and girls and get away with it. It is a system that tells women and girls, you should fight for men to like you. You should fight for the validation of men and boys. You should fight for acceptance in society. And it gives us all of these different indicators of what represents value for women. So if you're not married, for example, you're not woman enough. If you get married and you don't have a child, you're not woman enough. If you get married, you have a daughter, you don't have a son, you're not yet enough. So we have all of these markers that have been created to determine the value of our womanhood. And this is what a lot of women follow. I mean, I speak about SGBV. This morning I was on a panel and somebody was like, let's talk about the men. What about the women that also support, perpetrators of these crimes? And I say, we always need to come back to the system. We always need to come back to the base and the root. Otherwise, we're not going to move forward. Because we can snip on the branches. We can cut out the dead leaves. But if the root is where the decay is, we need to uproot that whole tree. And that's what we need to do in the Gambia. We're in a system where you live in homes, and there is this perception when we talk about rape, when we talk about molestation, people think it's the man out on the streets that just jumps at you and does what they want and then leave. But evidence actually shows that the majority of the people who have experienced a form of gender-based violence, it happened, even if not within the household, it was done by somebody they know and trust. This is evidence, and I always like to emphasize that we do not wake up and make up these figures. And among ourselves, we know the figures are not even representative because there is not enough reporting happening of the cases, and that's something that I will come to eventually. But this is the system that we first need to accept. We live in the system that tells women you're second class to men, that tells women you're not the priority, that tells women muñal. Lepp luñ la munti def muñal. Dañ ko dee gis suñ takay sax. You're sending your daughter off to get married. All of the advice is about endurance, endurance, endurance. And what we're telling them to endure is not, man de dama sey sama jëkkër ñu ngi soona xëy na amuñ xaalis amuñ ñu ñëw dundale suñ doom liñ la wax ngay muñ mooy jëkkër bu laa dóor mooy jëkkër buy daanu sa kaw te fekk yow bugguloo ko loolu. Even the laws in the Gambia do not recognize marital rape, for example. What they tell you to accept is basically violence. They tell you to accept the violation of your rights and to keep quiet. And then they use that as a marker of how much of a successful married woman you are. So we live in a society where once you start to break away from that norm, you become a problem. Yeah. You are not married enough, you are not woman enough, you are not perfect, you are not okay. Takal len ko sa huja. Indil jigen bu wara say, indil jigen bu buga say, indil jigen bu muna say. These are the things that we hear. And it's about a social conditioning. If I'm growing up as a kid and all of my life, all I've ever heard is words that are preparing me for marriage. It's words that are preparing me for a life of domestication. That is all I am going to know. And that is why my position is always to never blame women, no matter what the case is. Because it is about a social conditioning. It is what we have been taught to accept as normal. And it takes a lot of work to actually move away from everything that we have been taught and say, there is something wrong with this. I need to stop. I'm going to step back and I need to unlearn everything that I have been taught, especially the harmful things, and then try to do better. So I think everything that we're discussing is really rooted in that system. And if we're not ready to tackle the system, it is uncomfortable. You said this at the beginning. But I think the Gambia and people in the Gambia should be ready to be uncomfortable. The discomfort that people face, a lot of the time we're told, you're leading this fight, you're speaking up, it is great. It is not easy work. It is work that comes with a lot of violence. Every single day we're getting insulted, we're having our worth questioned, we have people sending all sorts of rude remarks to us and disgusting remarks. These are things that we should not have to deal with by virtue of simply being human beings and by virtue of just wanting to enjoy our rights. So for me, it is really about asking the question, is the country ready to sit in the discomfort of the conversations that we need to have, the very difficult conversations we need to have, and understand what really is the problem? And are we ready to solve it? Because otherwise what we're doing is really just using the stories of victims and survivors to cause a buzz 1 week, next week it dies out, the survivor goes back into their corner, they have to deal with their own trauma when there's really no change happening. So I think any work whatsoever has to go towards a very holistic systemic change that can guarantee that no matter whatever happens to anyone, regardless of your class, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of whatever your sociocultural definitions are, you will get justice, and this will end.
We come back to you, Jaha. The support system, the whole discomfort, the whole challenge against women, I find it very difficult that, yes, it may be designed for the pleasure of men, but being helped by women and being amplified by some women. What are we doing also within to also confront, not necessarily confront, but also to educate women who also contribute towards emboldening boys in particular. And for me, this is important. We men, husbands, grown-up guys, need to learn. And once we learn, we need to also teach our boys. But so would other women that also amplify and re-echo this, because ultimately, the change will not happen without everybody on board with the change. Starting with men, of course. But how do you see the support of women also towards the continuity of violence against women, raping young girls? And we know there are a lot of mothers who will say, Suturama. Dama aiba la li buko suma naw la yi degi wala li suma wude yi suma dekandor yi am di Jama yokay li mom suturama rek. And we think the culture continues to exist because this sutura culture and the maslaha supports it.
So, I mean, I think recently there's been a rape case, and what I've been seeing online is a campaign to release the rapist. And it's mainly women that are asking for the rapist to be released. And personally, I was disgusted when I saw that. And this is where I think I disagree a little with Jama when she says that we should never blame the women. I think the same way we're asking men to unlearn some of these patriarchal views that they hold, us as women, we need to unlearn the patriarchal views. I agree, we were raised in a society that has made us believe that we're not as good as men and that we should have sutura in our marriages, and we've been conditioned to believe and have some of the belief systems that we do. But personally, I think as a nation, the same way men need to learn the culture of violence in their head, women also need to do the same thing, because we can't continue making excuses for women supporting rapists and issues like this. I don't see any justification for something like that. I mean, I know that women have been conditioned, and because of all of there's a lot of reasons why we think the way we do. Even personally, sometimes I think I hold patriarchal views because of the family that I come from, because of the way I've been raised. But slowly, I'm teaching myself to unlearn those things that I think are acceptable, that I shouldn't be willing to accept. For instance, marital rape is something that you can't even discuss in my family. If you show up and tell my dad that your husband has raped you, people find that laughable. And I've seen that. And before, I agreed with that, wherein I've been made to believe that your husband can never rape you. He has a right to sleep with you whenever he wants. But if I don't stop myself and make a difference in my daughter's life and show her that that is unacceptable, and I continue justifying that just because my mother told me that's the way things should be, it's not acceptable in my life. And I think women need to unlearn.
I agree with you. We come to you, Bafo. That's one of the issues I find problematic. Now, whether it's a question of law, whether it's a question of enforcement, whether it's so deeply rooted a tradition. When you go to certain communities, girls get married as young as 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, what is the law doing? Because we are talking about a 15-year-old being pregnant. Now, would the conversation have been different if that 15-year-old was married? Which I think, in fact, it would have been different. So what is the law doing also to protect legal rape? I mean, or acceptable rape? Because if a person is married and is underage, is beneath the age of consent, and that person constantly gets pregnant and has children and is dealing with a much older person, somebody old enough to be a father, somebody old enough to be a grandfather in some cases. I mean, you see people in their 60s marrying somebody in their teens. Is young enough to have been your granddaughter, no? But what's the law doing also? Because we have to know, like Jama had said earlier, it must be holistic. The approach must be holistic. If a 13-year-old gets married in a village somewhere and has a child and is okay, and then another 13-year-old has a child by somebody else and it's not okay simply because they are not married, I think the law also needs to revisit some of these little elements because it could make a difference.
Thank you. First of all, let me just highlight that child marriage is prohibited in the Gambia. And I like the fact that Jama has made mention of that. The conversation is changing now. The conversation is changing because the laws are changing. The laws are changing in order to accommodate the issues that are happening to women and children in the Gambia. And therefore, people need to know about these laws in order to direct the conversations. And thank you for asking me that question, because we've seen, of course, child marriage has been happening. It's been part of the norms of the Gambia. But under human rights, these are the harmful traditional practices that we look at. Therefore, when you come to the Gambia, before 2015, before 2016, although, like I said, we've had the Children's Act, but the Act did mention, first of all, let me tell you that in the Gambia, a child is someone below 18. And that definition is as an obligation that the Gambia has with respect to its international the obligations that it has under the international laws, in order to define who a child is within the shores of the Gambia. Now, before 2015 or 2016, child marriage was not seen to be a crime, because the Children's Act did mention it, but the way it was defined, it was neither a crime nor accepted. So it was not very clear. And that changes in 2016 when the Children's Act was amended in order to prohibit child marriage. And that was a very huge step that the government took. And that the activists and every other person, the advocates, everyone involved themselves in making sure that the community is aware of these changes. When we talk about child marriage, the Act is very explicit, because it says that a child marriage is a marriage between a child or between a child and an elder. That is what you just asked. Sometimes we see people in their 60s, in their 70s getting married to 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, and that's what is the law. That is what the law is trying to accommodate. And also, it can be either a male child or a female child. It doesn't matter. And the law went on to explicitly emphasize on the fact that it is prohibited in the Gambia in all its forms. It could be a marriage between a child and a child, or a marriage between a child and an elder. Therefore, when any person is found guilty of this offense, the law has made a very, very, stiff penalty. But the fact that we are not getting reports of these cases is also another thing. I will get to it. Because the law has said that whoever is found guilty of this offense, you may be convicted to up to 20 years. There is nothing like fine, there is nothing like a minimum term. No, it's about up to 20 years. So it depends on the court, the judge. You could get a 20-year sentence if you're found guilty. And it went on to clarify that it doesn't matter who the person is. It could be the father, the mother, the brother. But let me emphasize that with child marriage, mostly it's the fathers. With marriage, child marriage is the fathers. When we go to other harmful traditional practices, we have ones that the women are they are in the forefront. But with this, mostly it's the fathers who will go and conduct the marriage, and the mothers, like Jama said, those are the kind of things that you've been seeing. So basically, you will see that the law has really accommodated these things. So now, it's one thing to have the law in place, and another thing to enforce the law. Because if you have the law and you don't get a report of those cases now, how do you now in turn prosecute the cases? But that notwithstanding, we are aware of child marriage cases happening, and then the Department of Social Welfare being informed, they always intervene to make sure that those marriages are stopped. But with respect to these cases, the rape cases, rape is rape. It doesn't matter who does it. It could be the lawyer, the doctor, the farmer, the shopkeeper.
The husband.
The husband. No. With the Gambia, there's nothing like marriage. So it's not. We have to clarify
that. Why not?
Well, the law, if you go to the
why not?
Rape
is rape.
Yeah. If you go to the sexual offense.
So if there is sexual violence between a husband and a wife, in that regard, it will not be called rape.
There is domestic violence, and domestic violence,
and if the violence is sexual, it will not be rape.
It will not be rape in the Gambia, because the law explicitly said marital rape is
we
not.
need to look at our laws, eh?
And thank you for bringing up this conversation, because these are things, that's what exactly they are talking about.
Yeah.
But then that conversation was initiated sometime before 2013. That was before the enactment of the Women's Act. And it brought up a huge debate within the lawmakers, and some other quarters, and people in some other quarters. But then, as it's right now in the Gambia, marital rape is not a crime, and the act can only be a crime if the law defines it to be a crime. So that is very important for us to know. But despite that, I would just want to highlight on the issue of SGBV. When we talk about sexual and gender-based violence, I think they have really touched on all the issues. Because when it's about gender, it's the definition that the society has given to men and women. You are a boy, so you're not expected to be washing clothes. You are a girl, you're not expected to be playing football. You understand? That is how the society divides between what a woman should do, what a man should do. That is also what the law is trying to put into consideration, because we've seen violence happening to a category of one part of this gender group, and it's mostly the women. The women face, we can say, the law defines it in four different, or describes it in four different categories. There's what is referred to as the physical violence, there's the sexual violence, there's the economic violence, and there's the psychosocial or the psychological violence. And women in the Gambia are going through all these different types of violence. So I'll just leave it at that for now, and we can come back to each of them.
We can come back to that. We've had public opinion around. Sally Teng had gone around and spoken to a few people. We've also had a very great piece done by Lamin Sanyang, which we're also going to air in a bit. But coming back to you, Jama, do you think the laws are protective enough?
Thank you. I think before I respond to that, I would just like to clarify what I said regarding the women who support rapists, for example, because I think it's a really sensitive issue. My point is not that I am in support of these women who support rapists. My point is that we cannot condemn the women without acknowledging what has gotten them to that point. So if we're talking about solutions, for example, we must acknowledge what has gotten them to that point. And I believe I've repeated several times why we need to have a conversation to understand the root causes of these things. Why are women acting like this? Especially because sometimes we see women who are victims themselves, who are survivors themselves, who do this. How are we understanding the trauma that they have gone through, and how is that informing their behavior when a rape case happens, for example? So my point is basically I cannot support that, because sometimes we're on the receiving end. For the past 2 days, there's been a whole lot of posts on Facebook attacking feminists. You understand? So I cannot possibly support that. My point is we need to stop and interrogate why that happens. We need to understand why women behave in that way to be able to provide the support. If anything at all in this country, from what I have observed, it is the women who are doing the unlearning. It's the women who are doing the work as well of teaching, which is really hard work, teaching their own peers, teaching young women that they work with, teaching even the men. It is the women that do that. So when it comes to the laws, it's a tricky one. Right? So we have the laws, and that is perfect. But do the laws work for the purpose for which they were created? That's another conversation. And for me, that's what's important. If we have the laws and they do not work,
beautiful on the book.
They're as good as nothing, to be honest. I mean, there have been cases that have made it to court, like Bafo has said, and we've seen some of the outcomes. Some of the sentences are too lenient for a case as serious as rape, where you have somebody's life destroyed. We talk about healing, but does healing really happen? Does healing ever stop? Do you get to a point where you say, I am healed from this experience? It is a continuous thing. Sometimes you see just one small thing and you get triggered. And that's what happens to so many of us, because we're working on these things, but we also have our own stories that we have to deal with. And so for me, it has always been about how well are these laws working for us. And I think one of the problems with that is with regards to awareness. Do the women of this country know the laws that protect them? Do the women of this country know about the Women's Act and what it entails? Do they know about the Children's Act and what it entails? Do they know about the Sexual Offences Act and what it entails? Yes, when the laws are passed, there are some efforts to engage with the communities. There are some efforts around sensitization using different platforms, including the media. But what kind of engagement are we using to ensure every woman in this country knows that rape, for example, as SGBV, constitutes a violation of my rights? But going beyond that, this and that place are where I can go to get help. So for me, I think that also contributes to why we're not getting a lot of reports. If people do not know that they can go get help, they're not going to go get help. If they don't know where they can go to get help, they're not going to go there. So I think for me, yes, there's a lot of work being done, but there needs to be a lot more work around sensitization and letting people know we have these laws in this country that protect you. Yes, there was a lack of confidence in the justice system, but I think that is picking up now from what we are seeing. People are starting to regain trust in the justice system. So we need to capitalize on that moment and let people understand that these laws are here and this is where you need to go to get the support that you need. Otherwise, what we're going to see is just 1 or 2 cases that get, some limelight because maybe the people who are involved are high profile. But the many people who don't have access whatsoever to justice are going to keep living with their stories and the trauma that they're dealing with. And I think it's an opportunity as well for at least the state institutions to also find ways of partnering very closely with the civil society organizations, with the community-based groups, with traditional communicators, for example. The ministry cannot do all of the work. There's not enough capacity to be able to go across the whole country and do the in-depth work. And so one of the models that we have used in our work is not to go teach communities come back. No, we go and we build relationships in those communities. Every community you go to already has a leader. Every community you go to already has their own set of communication structures. So it's basically about how you build partnerships in those communities so that when you leave, the work continues. So I think there is an opportunity there, and it's something we need to acknowledge, that a lot of people in this country do not even know where to go to seek help. We sometimes tell them go to the police, but is the police station the safest place for a victim to go report? Knowing that, the people who are probably going to talk to you first, you could go to a police officer and report your case, and that's somebody who actually believes that rape is not wrong. And that influences how they deal with you. And having that as a first contact is damaging in so many different ways. And it's not just about the justice they get, but the psychosocial support that they're also supposed to get. Because if I go with my rape case and the police officer shuts me, I go and I say my husband raped me, and the police officer laughs in my face. Yes. What does that do to me? What does that do for my story? And what does it mean for a husband who knows he can continue to do it? Because every time I go to the police, they're going to laugh at me. So I think there is that gap with regards to really raising awareness. And now that there's more confidence in the justice system, we should be capitalizing on that and making sure there's more partnership between the state and the civil society organizations so that we do not see ourselves or one another as enemies, but as partners working towards a similar goal. And then we try to engage as many women as possible.
Thank you, Jama. The guys in the control room, Mohammed, if we can have Lamin Sanyang's video ready. I think when I heard it, I was like, this is great. I think it's a good tribute and acknowledgement of women in general. And he sent me the audio yesterday, and I insisted that we must have a video ready today. And in fact, the video is ready. I have not seen it. Okay. So if the video is not what I expected it to be, please don't blame me. But the content of the audio is brilliant. So Mohammed, let's please play El Boy's video, and we'll be right back.
What does your wife do? I mean, she's really doing nothing, just at home with the kids, Nothing, really. Sometimes I don't understand my brothers, and really it bothers me. How can you belittle, downgrade, underrate and poorly rate the efforts of your wife so low just because she's not having a salary paying job like you? She single-handedly does all the cleaning, all the sweeping, all the cooking, laundry and everything it comes with every single day for every single one in the house. Yet you say she's doing nothing. Her day starts with waking up early than everyone. Why? Because her plan is to have breakfast done for everyone. 9 out of 10 we don't even thank her for it, but she don't mind because her primary objective is to make sure your tummy is full with homemade fresh food. Then she will rush to the market, get the best of what she can afford, rush back home, struggle with the heat from the burning sun, coupled with the fire in the kitchen all alone. Now the sun is at 90 degrees and she have to be underneath doing the laundry for hours, yet you say she's doing nothing. When the kids return from school,
I mean, when your kids return from school, she's there to receive them, feed them, bathe them, escort them to Dara, then rush back home to complete the laundry before you come. And when you come, she's still there, welcome you in, serve you lunch, ask about work, and then you will rant about how you overworked this and that and that and this and this and that. Yes, for you it's lunchtime, but for her it's the first break of the day, and it lasts for as long as you eat, because preparing dinner is next for her. She will prepare the dinner, serve the dinner, and whilst everyone is having dinner, she remembers, oh, I didn't have lunch today. But because you ate, she's okay. Yet you say she's doing nothing. It's getting late, and perhaps if she go to bed now, maybe, just maybe, she will get 7 hours sleep. But no, she has to wash the dishes, clean, set the bedroom tidy, make sure the kids are asleep, then come to bed, and soon you're gonna wake her up to be your wife. You know I'm right. Sometimes she is sick, but she can't get sick, otherwise things in the house will not stick, because apart from her, who else would? So she have to be strong to avoid anything going wrong. Sometimes she wanna go see her family, her friends, attend social events, but she can't, otherwise things in the house will fall apart. So instead, she will call to make up for her absence. Sometimes she also wishes she could wake up in the morning, dress modest, walk through the doors of an office, do her 8 hours and get paid, but she can't. Why? Just because of you. Yet you say she's doing nothing. In fact, this is how we say it. She's doing nothing really, just at home with the kids, eating and sleeping. Eating and sleeping. Really? Are you telling me you really don't know she's the reason why you are so much at ease when you go to work or even out of town? You are never worried about the kids, your food, your house, and all the valuables in it, because you know you have a chef in the house, a nanny in the house, a doctor in the house, and a security personnel in the house, all in the name of your wife. So, my brothers, please, next time you are asked about your wife, at least be grateful and don't insult her efforts. The Gambia, ever true. Peace.
In Sanyang, their wonderful peace. When I heard the audio, I said, well, we have to do a video about this. And like I said in the beginning of the program, today we are going to listen to women. We're going to amplify their voices. We're going to make sure we give the microphone to women to tell their stories. So I'm only here to guide a conversation. We have another story which will come shortly, but we also have just a couple of videos on WhatsApp also, which we will also air in the course of the program. So we start with Jama. So you remember Jama, Jaha, Bafu, Jama, Jaha, Bafu. So we're coming to you after the break. What do you think of the video?
I mean, I think it's powerful, and like I said, rape. The issue of rape and child molestation and what women go through in this country is not one that, I think someone said it here, little things can trigger you.
Yes.
When you work in this space.
Yeah.
Especially when you have your personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I was married off at the age of 15.
Mm-hmm.
And a child cannot consent to sex. When you force a child to get married, you've given someone the right to rape them over and over again. And a lot of times I know that our people hate to accept that, especially men that would be watching this and commenting on this, and they would try to use religion to denounce us in the work that we do and call us all sorts of names. On a daily basis we continue to hear that. And people try to define our intentions for us and why we do the work that we do without ever putting themselves in our shoes or thinking about how hard it is to wake up every single day and discuss something that is so personal yet so difficult and reliving that moment. So for me, the reason why rape has been so difficult for me to even speak on or to even comment on is because of my own personal experience, especially with child marriage. Because every single day that I spent in that marriage felt like rape. And I know that a lot of people, especially in my family that are probably watching this, will probably be disappointed that I said something like that. But it's the truth.
It is. Absolutely.
And we have to be willing to have these uncomfortable conversations so that people realize exactly what women go through and how they feel about these things. So personally, yes, marital rape is a reality for a lot of women in this country. And the laws, exactly, the laws that we have, Africa has some of the most beautiful laws on paper, and this is not just a Gambia problem. But the issue that we have is implementation is always a challenge. But not only enforcement, it's also about having mechanisms in place. Like for instance, I work for the World Bank. I work on a program called the Sahel Women's Economic Empowerment for Demographic Dividend. And recently I created a GBV reporting mechanism for that program that we plan to use in the countries that we work in. Gambia should have a GBV and sexual violence reporting mechanism and community resource scans so that women and girls in the community know where they can go, who they can talk to. And these people also need to be trained on how to handle these issues. These people need to know how to handle these issues. From the local chief, to the healthcare worker, to the police, to the social services that are available in that community. Every single person that would come in contact with a rape victim should know how to respond and what not to say and how to be sensitive to what they're going through. Because you can either kill or make that case simply based on the way you respond.
No, I'm just thinking, how am I going to drink?
Like, I really don't. So
I saw Jama cheating with her drinking.
Like, you can literally kill or make a rape case simply because of the way you respond.
Yeah.
If the police is the first person to come in contact with a victim or a survivor of a case, just the way they approach it or the kind of questions that they ask. What were you, like for instance, if I go to a police station and I'm asked, what were you wearing? What were you doing? Was it, like, instantly, that can stop me from sharing more that can lead into prosecutions because then I become embarrassed. And as we know in our society, rus, jigen, like that's non len ñu yaré. And dafa am yena yo xamantene da nga day jangal ne lolu sa cër la, and you know all of these things. So yes, laws are important, but tools and resources that we need that can help us enforce those laws are crucial as well. And I think the Ministry of Justice as well as our law enforcement needs to do a better job of working with civil society. I don't think we have that link in the Gambia. Even if you guys do have the resources, even if you've been doing the trainings, if a lot of people don't know what the government is doing, and personally, I want to say this, I think our government hasn't done enough. It's good that the Ministry of Justice is stepping up and doing more prosecutions, but if we've had for 3 days in a row a rape case being reported, we should have heard from our president. He should have made a statement. The women and girls in this country are counting on him. And he has a responsibility to make sure that we see that our leaders care about the welfare of our women in this country. And right now, we're not seeing that.
Right now, we're not seeing that. What are you seeing, Bob? You are at the heart of all of these things as far as the Ministry of Justice and making sure perpetrators don't go scot-free, that our girls and women are protected 24 hours.
Yes. I first of all want to go back to the point that she made with respect to the government collaborating with the CSOs in order to create a bigger platform. The institutions, the key relevant institutions in terms of the justice system with respect to the protection of rights of victims, the Ministry of Justice is collaborating with the NGBV. There's a network against gender-based violence, and the network has been in place since as far back as 2014 or thereabout. And they're doing a wonderful job because you could see that they set up a care team, and this care team is made up of Ministry of Justice, the police, the Department of Social Welfare, the FLAG, they are part of it, and also some other members, the hospitals as well. And every quarter, every 3 months, we will meet to share a report of the number of cases that we receive in our institutions. And how you will be shocked that between 2015 and now, the care team has recorded a total of more than 2,000 cases in 4 years or 5 years, 2,200 or thereabout cases. And out of these cases, 75% of them are children who have been raped, who have been sexually violated. Other than that, you have the women who are physically violated. You have the women who have been psychologically traumatized. And all these are part of the gender-based violence that we're talking about. And not only that, but of recent, about 2-3 weeks ago, you heard that the government, in collaboration with Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare, in collaboration with the Paradise Foundation, have now launched a gender helpline, 1313, that women can now use to call, or not only women, but every other person who is aware of a woman undergoing abuse in whatever form. You can call and report that matter, and then they can forward the case to the police, or they can support the police even in the investigation. So these are things that we are doing, and then in collaboration with the NGBB, there is what is referred as the one-stop center, because Jaha has mentioned the emotions that surrounds reporting, or the psychological traumas, the issues that are there, the society, the maslaha, and everything, and also the effect of repeating yourself as a rape victim. Because when you are, for example, when a child is raped, the first point of contact will be the parents. You will have to explain to the parents what happened. Then you will have to explain to the neighbors what happened. You will have to explain to the community, because people will come and ask what happened, and they want you to be explaining. And as you keep on repeating yourself, you are creating more trouble for the child. The psychological effect of it. Then you go to the police station. From the police station,
you're
you go to
relieving
the
the
hospital.
moment.
And every part that you go to, you will have to relieve everything that happened. So because of that, the NGBB, in partnership with government, they have established what is referred to as one-stop centers. And these one-stop centers, one is at the Banyu Hospital, there's one at the Kalimi Hospital. What it's meant is that by the time it's fully established, what you would have is that you can get the doctors, you get the police officers, you get the lawyers, you get the social workers. They will all be there in one-stop center, that you can meet all of them and report your case once and for all. There will be no need for re-traumatization of the victim all at all. And that is as a result of the partnership that government has with the CSO. We've realized, government has realized that the work is too huge. We cannot do it alone. So therefore, we need the support and the complementarity of the CSOs, NGOs, independent partners, and the communities at large. Because like I said, it's one thing to have the laws in place, another thing to fully implement those laws. And we can only implement these laws if cases are reported. And when they are reported, there is no interference. We have to talk about the thing. There is interference in the way the cases are processed. You understand? So therefore, we need to make sure that all those forms of interference are stopped, are cut from the root. Because the law is there and there is no one above the law. There is nothing like immunity, and the laws, like I said, Gambia has an obligation, and this obligation, it needs to respect. And it can only respect it when the women and children of the Gambia feel safe, protected. So,
thank you. We'll go now to another short break. Lala Ansuture had done a video, and there's also a report by Sally Jeng. So we'll go to Lala now, the interview that she's had with Sally Jeng, and then we'll be right back. We are discussing here the loud silence, in particular surrounding women and girls issues in the country. That this is a conversation that has been ongoing, but perhaps we need to all use our platforms and our voices to add to the challenges that are going on by women, and to begin to address such and take ownership where necessary of and take responsibilities. And I think in particular us men need to be on the driver's seat by first changing attitude and appreciating what is going on and acknowledging it for a fact, I think that's the beginning of what we need to do to bring about the needed change in our community and our society, and that is why we're here today. So Mohammed, if we can go with Lala's short interview, and we're back here again.
This is very concerning for us, not just as activists, but as women, as mothers, as people who work with girls who are continuously subjected to all kinds of sexual violence and cases of gender-based violence. So this is a concern to all of us who are working in areas of sexual violence, in areas of women's rights, in areas of protection of the rights of children. And I think this should be a concern for every Gambian. It should be a concern for the government to take up the cause to champion the fight against sexual violence in our country too.
Most times during crises, people are focused within that specific crisis, but issues like gender-based violence are not really discussed and are not given much attention. This is one of the things that is being attributed to the rise in the cases of gender-based violence in the country. Of course, the recent COVID-19 pandemic, there has been reported cases of rape, wife bettering, and so many things. How does COVID-19 has impacted the life of women generally with gender sex?
Globally, it has been reported that there is an increase of sexual and gender-based violence cases since the advent of the coronavirus. In countries like South Africa, in France, so many countries around the world have reported that there is a drastic increase in the number of sexual and gender-based violence cases since the coronavirus started, because women have to because of the lockdown, women live with violent partners, with violent husbands. Children live with their violent parents, So all of these have increased the number of sexual and gender-based violence cases. In the Gambia, we cannot say for certain, because there is no research or there is no survey done to measure if there is an increase due to the coronavirus and how the coronavirus has affected or has impacted sexual and gender-based violence cases in the Gambia. But what I do know, at all times when crises happen, whether it is war, whether it is genocide, whether it is outbreaks of viruses or diseases or whatever it is, at all times when crises happen, women are highly affected. So I do know that the sexual and gender-based violence cases in the Gambia, it is still going on. Cases are still increasing. Every other day you hear about a girl or a woman who has been raped. You hear about a girl or a woman who has been subjected to domestic violence. So when crises happen, it is evident that women are highly affected. And with the coronavirus, it's not just sexual and gender-based violence in the Gambia. It is the economic, women who depend on petty trading, who depend on remittances sent from abroad by relatives and their children and all that stuff. So this coronavirus has highly affected the lives and livelihoods of women in this country, and I do believe that it has also contributed to the number of sexual violence cases that we are hearing about these past couple of weeks.
Many times when things of rape or cases of rapes occur within the families, people don't report this because they like to discuss in a family way or settle it at a community level. How has this affected the work of women activists or activists generally in the Gambia?
I think it is evident, and I think everybody who lives in the Gambia, because of the societal construct, because of the patriarchy, when issues of sexual violence, of domestic violence, any kind of violence that is subjected on women, people like to talk about it and settle it within the family settings, within the neighborhood, within the community, not having it reported to the police, not having it reported to the authorities so the law can take its course. So this is something that has been going on for a while, and I believe we have, as activists, as organizations that are championing the fight against sexual and gender-based violence, we have been trying to raise community-based awareness. We've been trying to have community dialogue. We've been doing advocacy through different means to make sure that people know when they encourage the culture of silence, when they allow these things to happen without talking about it, without taking it to the police, without reporting it, they are adding to the trauma of the women who were subjected to this, any any kind of violence, that especially when it is rape, you know, they are adding to the trauma, and they also adding to they're adding, or they're giving so much power to the perpetrators to be able to do this more and more and more times, because they know they're not going to be held accountable for their actions. So we have been trying to raise community awareness. Like I said, we've been working with authorities, we've been influencing policies at government level, and we've been working with community and traditional and religious leaders to change the narrative around the conversation on sexual and gender-based violence, because of how women are regarded in society. When things like this happen to them, people don't give it relevance. And when something like rape happens, it is as serious as murder. It is as serious as any other capital crime. So why is it that when these other crimes happen, people treat it with so much seriousness, but when it comes to rape, people are so unserious about it? Even the authorities are at some point unserious about it. So we have been doing what we can, and I believe that it is about time that the government also takes bold steps to make sure they take a strong stance against sexual violence and take actions and set examples out of perpetrators in this country.
Rape apologists and laws that are not properly enforced, these are all things that contributed to people not speaking out.
Yes, we have seen instances in this country. It is a continuous process that when a victim comes out to give accounts or narrate accounts of her experience, of her story, of how she was victimized, of how she was made a victim of sexual violence or gender-based violence, we've seen how standing in solidarity with the rapist, with the perpetrator, has been normalized in our society. And explanations of how he does not look like a rapist. Nobody looks like a rapist. There is no name tag that is, that you can see on somebody's face and be able to identify them as a rapist. There are our fathers in our homes, our brothers, our uncles, our nephews, our teachers in the school, our boss in the work offices. There are random people we meet in the street. So they are not people who have a name tag on their forehead to identify, for us to be able to identify them as rapists. So it is really sad and disheartening that when cases come up, especially when the perpetrator is somebody influential and the perpetrator is somebody that is well known, excuses are made for that person and people stand in solidarity with that person, forgetting that there is a victim involved, somebody who was forcefully raped, somebody who is living with trauma, is highly traumatized, somebody who has to relieve that memory every time somebody subjects them to victim blaming and victim shaming. And these are things that we need to change. And there is this narrative of people trying to justify rape with innocent until proven guilty. I would rather stand with a victim of sexual violence until the perpetrator is proven otherwise, then stand with the perpetrator, and then when the matter goes to court and the perpetrator turns out guilty, I then turn back to try to apologize to a victim who have caused so much pain to because of, me trying to justify the perpetrator's act. And there are certain things that happen in our society. When rape happens, there is always, let's wait for the perpetrator's side of the story. When rape happens, unlike other crimes, when a murder is committed, they look for things like the murder weapon. They look for things like of these things. But when rape happens, there is hardly any evidence that you can count on. So in most cases, it is the medical report, it is the victim's story against the perpetrator's story. So, and perpetrators of sexual violence are always mostly very manipulative, sick psychopaths who are able to twist stories to make it look like whatever happened to the victim can be justified. So we need to start having unfiltered, honest conversations around sexual violence, and we need to start holding perpetrators accountable for their actions. This is the only way that we are going to help cut down or curb the spread of the high number of sexual and gender-based violence that is happening to our country. I feel like the lack of accountability from the government, the lack of enforcement of the laws that we have in place from the side of the government is making it easier for perpetrators to get away with it, and it is encouraging other men in our society to prey on young girls, to prey on women and make them victims of sexual and gender-based violence.
Finally, how long will it take for this country to take victim-based approach?
It is going to take a long while. It is going to take a lot of work. It is going to take collective efforts from civil society and government. It is going to take sacrifices from civil society, from activists. We have to be able to take a stance, a strong stance, not just to take a stance, and when everybody else turns against the victim, you are, trying. If you are going to speak up for women's rights, if you're going to speak up for the rights of children who are subjected to sexual violence, you take that stance no matter what happens. Even if the perpetrator is going to threaten to kill you, you take that stance. We've seen how perpetrators of sexual violence in this country have turned on activists, have turned on their victims, and all the things, manipulative things that they have done to change the narrative from people holding them accountable to questioning the morality or the character of the people who accuse them of such an act. So we need to take a strong stance, and we need to be able to commit to champion the cause against sexual violence, and to stand up for the rights of women and children at all times, as a people, as a country, and most importantly as the government. We need to see the government take the Ministry of Women's Affairs. We have the Women's Bureau. We have social welfare. All of these people, we need to start seeing our government, and recently in the parliament they're tabling bills, that will protect and promote the rights of women and all that stuff, which is very welcoming, but we need to see more effort from the government. We can only do so much as activists, we can only do so much as civil society activists, as civil society, but we need to see government taking a stance against sexual violence. And mind you, there are certain cases that happen, it is the government officials themselves who do not want the cases to go through the justice system. So it is very disheartening, it is very unacceptable to have government officials who are meant to protect and promote and safeguard our rights as women and young girls in our society, taking a stance with the perpetrator, or taking a stance or trying to make sure certain cases do not get through the justice system. It is really unacceptable, and as civil society activists, we are going to do whatever we can do, and if it gets to a point where we have to start naming names and exposing people, we will name names and we will expose people, because that is how much this
to this platform discussion forum that we are having here regarding women and of course the recent happenings right now of rape incidences involving very, very, very young girls. Not that I acknowledge or accept rape for even an older person, but it's sad, it's really, really sad that grown men would betray women that they know, girls that they know that are entrusted to them, sometimes family members, sometimes people that they're in fact responsible for. And it's very sad. So this discussion today is to amplify the voices. It's for us to have this unpleasant conversation. And we can no longer keep brushing this aside and putting it under the carpet. And I think this crusade must be led by men. I think most of these are happening. We are the perpetrators. Men, elderly men especially, are the people that are doing this. Sometimes very responsible people. I don't think they are responsible by the behavior, but I mean old, mature, educated people in positions of power and authority influencing young, vulnerable women. And it's sad status, in fact it is. Jama, recently we've heard that some highly placed government officials are going to home and pleading with victims sometimes, and I think it's despicable. I mean, there are people that are in government and sometimes in very high positions who should lead by example, who should be advocating and educating people. They cannot be seen to be encouraging such.
I totally agree. But before I get into that, I just wanted to take a moment to send a lot of love to Lala. We just finished watching her video. Lala has been consistently supporting victims and survivors of sexual gender-based violence. amidst a lot of abuse, amidst a lot of insults, people call her family to report her, but she has remained steadfast at the cost of her own emotional well-being. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, Lala, for all of the work you're doing. We're currently collaborating to try and see how we can provide some more support. Before mentioned, sometimes the focus is very heavily on the perpetrator, and we forget that the victims and the survivors require a lot of support as well. On the issue of interference, I think Bafo has mentioned it as well, and I think this is one of the reasons why people had lost trust in the justice system before. There was a lot of interference in cases, which means that people quite often do not get the justice that they are seeking or the justice that they deserve for the violations that have happened to them. In the recent case that we have heard, when I heard it, I was angry. I was angry because the government is there to protect the people. The government is there to protect the rights of the people, every person in this country. But sometimes you pause and reflect if women and girls in this country matter at all. So we have a government where every time there's a statement, so let's say independence, for example, there's a paragraph where they talk about we prioritize women's rights. Sometime last year, after so much advocacy, we saw the creation of the Ministry of Women's Affairs. It's unfortunate that they're not here.
They have been invited, they just failed us.
It's been more than a year since the creation of that ministry. And to be honest, I cannot really point to what exactly the ministry is doing and what change actually they are creating in the lives of women. I may just be in the dark and not know. But I think that is one of the problems. We've had, since last year, when Tufa came out with her story, I would believe perhaps that is when we started having the conversation at this level, with this amplitude. And then it's like, you have so many other cases. When Tufa came out, some other women started to come out with their stories, because this is what happens. Part of it is pressure, because you're thinking, oh, I need to come out and talk about mine as well. And nothing. There was a statement from the Ministry of Justice encouraging survivors to reach out to them and share their stories, but we're not even sure where that has gone. Maybe that is why we're seeing some prosecutions now. I do not know. But at the level of the government, the last thing we want to see is government officials interfering with the process for justice. The last thing we want to see is to see the highest elected official in this country, is to see the people we have elected or the people that we have entrusted with caring for us, with protecting our rights and ensuring their fulfillment, doing the opposite. Now, when you interfere in rape is a criminal case. You're interfering in that. If it succeeds, what you're basically doing is putting back a potential rapist into the community. And that person now has an opportunity to continue doing what they were doing, because they know, well, I have the backing of the government. I am going to go ahead and do what I want to do because there will be no consequences. We've seen several cases. Last year, there was also a high-profile case where several women came out and made accusations, and they were still being denied the opportunity to just be believed, to just have people tell them, I believe you. That was not happening. And then we see somebody, and this was by a person who was employed by government. This was by a lawyer. We see institutions, so many institutions, who are very happy to always jump and make statements when they feel like there are human rights violations. They keep quiet. I'm calling out the Gambia Bar Association, for example. I'm calling out FLAG, for example. What are they doing? We see the statements when there's violence in communities, for example. There are always statements coming out. Don't women's rights matter? When we talk about the new Gambia, when we talk about the change, don't women's rights matter? Why do we always leave it to the feminists? Why do we always leave it to the women's rights organizations? Why does everybody sit back and say, you do it, knowing fully well that we usually have no resources or little resources, which means our capacity is limited, and that also has an impact on how much impact we're able to create in the communities. When I heard about this case of interference, we were wondering, what can we do? Because we also acknowledge that there's only so much we can do. We do not have all the power to turn the tides and make sure everybody has justice. We have our mouths, we have our pens, we have our phones, we have our tools, and that's what we're using. But it is those very tools that people choose to criticize quite a lot of the time. They call us Twitter feminists. They call us half-baked feminists. They call us keyboard warriors. You understand? They tell us our approaches are wrong. They like to make noise and then move on to the next thing, without acknowledging the fact that we are not the ones who hold power to ensure people receive justice. We can support that. We can continue to ensure there is attention on the case. And this is also why I call out the media. What is your role? What is your responsibility? Why did it take so long to report on this particular case? When for a long time we have been complaining about the media just coming out and reporting on a case in a very insensitive manner. Where does the problem lie? And so we need to stop and ask ourselves, what do we really believe in? What do we stand for? When we say we respect human rights, we believe in human rights, we are human rights defenders, are we talking about humans or just men? We need to ask that question to ourselves, because every time there's a violation that is known against a woman, it is always the same group of people who are doing that work, of trying to provide support, of trying to make sure there's attention maintained on those cases. The government has a responsibility to protect. We are in what you might consider a state of emergency on sexual violence. Every single day we're hearing about cases, and these are just the ones we hear about. There are so many that are happening in homes that nobody talks about. There is a war that is being waged on women's bodies. Our bodies are on siege, and that needs to stop. We need to see a government that is committed to the complete protection of women and assure us that it's not just about going to the UN for the Commission of the Status of Women and telling them we are doing this and that and that. The women in this country need to feel that change. We need to feel that we are protected. We need to feel that when I am raped and I go to court, there wouldn't be a high-ranking government official interfering or trying to go to my family to negotiate, thereby interrupting the process for justice. We need to have an honest conversation about what kinds of leaders we're electing. Yes. And this comes to the point around why we don't have more women and what is happening with the women in leadership right now. What is happening with the women in cabinet? What is happening with the women at the National Assembly? Why are they not speaking up? Why are we not hearing them? What is happening to the female lawyers in this country? Why are they not stepping up to volunteer and support the victims and make sure they have legal assistance? What is happening to the female journalists in this country? Why are they not getting up to make sure these stories are covered? Why are they not getting up to make sure the stories get the attention they deserve? Because what you see is a trend. The stories get attention, the attention dies down, the court just brushes it to the side, nobody really knows what happens again. You understand? And that's what needs to change. We need to have a flow that works. Cases are reported, evidence is generated, they are prosecuted, justice takes its course. If the accused person is guilty, the law is there to state what the punishment is. If they're not guilty, they're free to go. This is the process that needs to happen. Women need to start seeing that the law is working for us. So it is a huge shame when we sit and hear reports that high-ranking government officials are actually trying to interfere in a criminal case. What are you telling that little girl? You're telling her the life of the man that has violated your rights is more important than your life. And it is more important than the life of the baby who is now going to bear the stigma of halebi mo neka dom buñ doon wax ci case bobu nonu. Halebi mom lañ biral. Nobody talks about. And again, I mentioned the issue of the media. We see how cases of sexual violence are reported. And that also has a bearing on how people also react to the cases. Because if you're reporting a case from an angle where you're already blaming the victim, that's what people are going to run with. If you're reporting from a case where you open up the space for people to poke holes into the story, that is what they're going to deal with. And the victims are sometimes seeing all of these reactions, and nobody really understands the magnitude of the trauma that they're dealing with. That you have to first deal with the violence that has happened. You first have to deal with the violation that has happened, but you also have to deal with a society that is pointing at you and telling you, you are responsible for what has happened to you. So it is a shame to hear that the government that has been elected, that the government that has been selected in some forms to protect the rights of women is reported to be interfering in a case that deals with an issue that affects a lot of women. We say 1 in 3, but I don't even like to use that figure because I know it could be more than that. So we need to have a serious conversation and put our leaders to task and say, we have our voters' cards. Women in this country are no longer sitting back. Women are mobilizing. We're not going to continue allowing a system where our bodies continue to be the collateral for everything that a man wants to do and get away with. This is what we are saying, and I hope especially the women in government who have access to power will step up and try to provide support for these victims and their families, as well as survivors too.
Thank you. Oh boy, you have unbottled. But it's good. I think this is it. My role here is to listen. And I would want to encourage this to happen often, and where we could sit and talk about these issues. I think change doesn't happen in the absence of acceptance in the absence of education, in the absence of creating awareness. I think a lot of things that are happening, people are hiding behind Islam, people are hiding behind culture, behind tradition, and economic powers also. This, for me, is where someone like you would come in, Jama, to look at it. I think the dominance continue because our women have been, from day one, not been given the right tools to independence economically, to education, to access to finance, to resources. Now, if you are not able to do for yourself, it becomes difficult. I think economically, that's where a lot of men can bully you. And this is not uncommon in Gambia, where your husband will beat you to nothingness, and your mother will say sturama, and your mother will say aki jama taranga bimla defal maye bunje kabi kili suman nawlay sumanli. It always seems like the young woman has no say in her own life. And sometimes it's grown women in their 30s and 40s, and your parents will still continue to say dinala halak, dinala nyana, dinala. So it's a lot of things that are holding us back as a community, as a society, and we must address them. But I think also, as far as we're talking about advocacy, great, but how are we changing it from the whole? From when the girl is 2 and the boy is 3, from when they are 5, to create that environment of appreciation, but that environment of equality, that all of you can be whatever you want to be, and we will create as parents the environment for you to become that successful story. I think fathers and mothers, day one, must begin, because our generation has already failed.
I mean, Ron, you and I are Sarahule, and we understand that money is power. And I think one of the, personally, my belief is one of the biggest root causes of patriarchy, and the reason why patriarchy continues is because women don't have access to money. And women have been held back traditionally. When you look at our educational system, more boys graduate secondary school than women do. Marriage is a factor, teenage pregnancy is a factor, household chores are factors. And when this happens to girls, you cannot expect them to have the same access to employment opportunities as men do. When you look at the COVID crisis, for instance, women are more impacted because we are more in the service industry than men are. Men have their own businesses, and traditionally they are more educated, so they have better access to higher paying and better jobs, whereas women are always on the other side of things. So I think in order for us, we started a community gardening initiative in Farafenni a few years ago, and I remember something that a woman told me that is very powerful. She said not only has she been able to use those vegetables to feed her children, but she's also been able to send her daughters to school. And one thing she told me is when you have money, you have a choice. And I take myself as an example. There are things that I get away with in my family. It's because I can stand up for myself, because I have my own money. I don't have to wait for a husband. You cannot kick me out of my house because I decide to be unmarried. I own my house. That in itself is power. My sisters can't do that. If their husbands are abusing them and beating them up, they're worried that if they come back home, my father will send them back to their husbands. I don't have those same worries because of the platform and opportunities that I've been blessed to have. And I think every single woman and girl in this country should be able to have those choices. It shouldn't be a privilege for a woman to be educated. It should be a right. And I think one of the reasons why when I knew that I was coming here today, and ever since the rape crisis started increasing and we started seeing more cases, I sat my team down and I asked them, what can we do? What is a gap that we don't have? And I don't think Gambia currently has, and Jama, correct me if I'm wrong, do we have a legal fund for women and survivors of rape.
No, I don't think there is a specific fund.
So I am committed.
But that's why flag becomes important in this, because there is a female lawyers association.
Yes, there's a female, but they are not doing what they are supposed to do. If we have a female lawyers association, we need to call them out on it. So I'm glad that that issue was raised. But I would say that I'm fortunate in a lot of ways because of the resources that I have access to, which is one of the reasons why I am committed with Safe Hands for Girls, along with other women's rights organizations that are in the Gambia, for us to set up a collective defense fund for victims of sexual and gender-based violence, especially rape cases in the Gambia. If a survivor is victimized by a powerful man and they have a lawyer that is representing them, what happens to that victim and that family? How do we ensure that they are supported? So for me, how can I contribute? Because in every situation that I find myself in, I want to know what can I do. And I think this is one way that we would like to continue our partnership with other women's rights groups in the Gambia and create this fund that I am committed to put some personal funds towards to get it started.
I think that's powerful, but we'll come to you. You are next, actually. But time is flying so fast. We have about 17 minutes to go, which I may steal some time from Lamin Fall and the news team. So we'll go to Mohammed now with a story by Sally Jang, and we have a few videos also that we also want to air. And then when we come back, we'll have perhaps maybe 10 minutes or so to close up the conversation. This is just a beginning, and probably we should do it a bit often, maybe once a month or so. I don't know. We were engaging flag, we had issues. Maybe we should start reaching out to Think Young Women and Safe Hands for Girls and the new organization with Aisha Balde and them and all of these women movements, and just keep talking and educating the public. I think that's where the future would be. Mohammed, if you can play Sally Jang's story, and then we'll come back to the studio here.
In a typical African setting, cases of SGBV are mostly discussed at family and community levels to safeguard the reputation of the family of the victim and perpetrators in some cases. This has deterred many victims from coming forward in public spaces to report cases of sexual and gender-based violence, such as rape, wife battering and child molestation, living with the fear of being stigmatized. Lately in the Gambia, there have been series of reports on rape cases, the latest being a 7-year-old girl. Government authorities, women rights activists and civil society partners have raised concern over
some level of increase in one-on-one violence and assault and stabbing and domestic violence relating to gender-based violence issues as well. These are the kind of cases that we have seen coming up frequently during the pandemic.
It's been years, it's been decades that we've been fighting for equal representation, fighting for the recognition of women's rights as human rights. So for the mere fact that men feel entitled to our body and our space without our consent and our permission is very degrading.
In the number of cases that have been reported, you would see that most of the victims are children, and most of them are also female. Even though we have the case of the boy, I think we have 2 cases of boys who have been also sexually molested during this period.
It is evident, and I think everybody who lives in the Gambia, because of the societal construct, because of the patriarchy, when issues of sexual violence, of domestic violence, any kind of violence that is subjected on women, people like to talk talk about it and settle it within the family settings, within the neighborhood, within the community, not having it reported to the police, not having it reported to the authorities so the law can take its course. So this is something that has been going on for a while, and I believe we have, as activists, as organizations that are championing the fight against sexual and gender-based violence, we have been trying to raise community-based awareness. We've been trying to have community dialogue. We've been doing advocacy through different means to make sure that people know when they encourage the culture of silence, when they allow these things to happen without talking about it, without taking it to the police, without reporting it, they are adding to the trauma of the women who were subjected to this any kind of violence, that especially when it is rape.
From some of the cases that we have been following, what we have observed or seen is that there are some cases that were not successfully prosecuted, meaning at the end of the day the perpetrator is acquitted.
These are the type of things that discourage victims from coming up. The stigma, the lack of trust in the system, which is why they need to ensure that it has been done. Because Sexual Offences Act is here. The Sexual Offences Act criminalizes rape in the Gambia, defilement and all of those things. But how many cases have been how many people have been prosecuted of rape? Not much.
In some cases, people hide behind religion that women should worship their men. Imam Basir Drame said Islam never encouraged SGBV, but rather empower women to be respected and treated well.
Quran has instructed us to take Prophet Muhammad as our example and our role model. In a chapter called Ahzab in the Quran, Allah has instructed us saying, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر وذكر الله كثيرا. Translation being, there has certainly been for you in the messenger of Allah an excellent pattern of behavior for anyone whose hope is Allah and the last day and who remembers Allah often. This ayah in Ahzab has instructed anybody who believes in Allah and believes on the day of judgment to take Prophet Muhammad as your role model. And being a role model, one of the areas of life in which we need to learn from the Prophet and take him as an example is his family life. Each and every one of his wives has informed us that he was a kind person. He has never beaten any of his wives, not only the wives, but any of his children, males or females, even the servants.
Despite challenges that laws are not being well enforced to protect victims or survivors of SGBV, there are activists that will never stop the fight to eradicate SGBV.
Most of the time they tell you that the offense of rape is really difficult to prove. Sometimes the victims don't come on time to report the cases, so it is difficult. Pursue it. Go to the latter, to the full extent of the law to ensure that justice is being served. At the end of the day, if you don't have enough evidence, we understand, but make sure you exhaust all the measures before anything is being done. So these acts need to be looked at again. It's okay to bring an act into existence, but what is not okay is to just have the act there as a picture frame or something like that without it being enforced or implemented. So more effort, more push needs to be done. As feminists and as activists, we've been doing a lot, especially using the social media space to make sure our voices are being heard. Because there was a time that women were being violated in public transportation, which goes back to ask, or we go back to ask ourselves, where are women really safe?
If prevention fails, crime occur, we also have a job to do as well, and that is to apprehend and prosecute offenders as well.
Some cases that we have been following up for the past 4 years, and they are still going on. So that is discouraging, because when you have a case of rape, for instance, and it drags for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, you are helping the perpetrators.
It is going to take a lot of work. It is going to take collective efforts from civil society and government. It is going to take sacrifices from civil society, from activists. We have to be able to take a stance, a strong stance, not just to take a stance, and when everybody else turns against the victim, you are, trying. If you are going to speak up for women's rights, if you're going to speak up for the rights of children who are subjected to sexual violence, you take that stance.
In the productivity of women and children.
And I think the conversation be for timely. Yaga amla. parce que rape culture lu yàggala si suñu société bi fii léegi danga dee taxawal yeneen ngay wax affaire human rights nit yi naan la affaire tubaab la waaye rape du tubaab bi isi fii sexual violence du tubaab bi isi fii loo xam ne si suñu société la nekk te léegi te gis nañ ne booba ba léegi mu ngi gën a toroxal xale yaa ngi suñ xale yu jigéen yi amaatuñ jàmm si seen biir dëkk foo xam ne foofu lañ leen war a protecté foo xam ne foofu lañ leen war a jàngalee provide leen that opportunity pour ñu grow into a person boo xam ne ñun ñëpp loolu lañ bëgg dëkk du mun a dem nag fii suñ jigéen yi ak ñun emuñ jigéen yi sonna nañ and I feel ne lii lu ñu war a wécci la te programs like this I think are timely and important pour ñu am ko suñ society. I also think ne there is need pour ñu am certain institutional reform ñu seetaat suñ luwaay yi ba du ole luwaa rek foog naa ñun suñ luwaay di koy advance na to an extent boo xam ne war nañoo commencé di implement luwaay nu mu waree ak naka la ñoo implémenter luwaa dafa bokka ñuy develop policies because fii man suma boppa dama ko dee joxe exemple maa ngi si university bi xaw ma léegi man ëllëg suma student accusé ne dama ko sexually harass how would the university deal with me how would the university address those issues benn government department doo fa dem nga gis affaire sexual violence policy ak yooyu lañ war a wécc yooyu lañ war a dugal si suñ lifin si suñ liggéeykaay nga ensure ne kenn koo xam ne dafa amee doole du mun a abuse that authority muy violate ñoo xam ne dañoo liggéey ondaam wala ñoo xam ne even bokkuñ fa so ñun dañ war a rectify mistakes yu bëri yoo xam ne suñ society ñu ngi ko nekk di def te I think right now mooy time bi.
And most of these kids that are being raped by family members. Suñ waxee seen yaay yi ne nañ leen suturaal sutura daf fi jeex that is over and to the mother it is your responsibility to protect your child. If your child comes to you ne dañ ma rape o kii daf ma def lii daf ma laalee fii laalee fële nga report ko loolu nga war a def jël ko yóbbu ko report ko to the police. The mothers, you guys play a big role to your daughters' lives. Protect them, safeguard them from these rapists. Make it reported, make it known, and let's shame them. Let's shame these rapists. Thank you. You see, there should also be a hotline specifically to report sexual assault and rape. In the Gambia, there should be a specific number to call. Lima bañ mooy seen doom yi suñ ñëwee report rape ngeen dem police ba ngeen a dem di report yi xëy na kër rape seen doom yi suñ ko waxee police bi turam dina ko xam dangaa gis ne police bi du si am ité o duñ investigate sax because police ba ka nga dem di report yi xëy na kooku mbokkam la moo tax ma ne Gambia should designate, maybe they do have it, maybe I don't know. There should also be a hotline specifically to report sexual assault and rape. In the Gambia, there should be a specific number to call. Lima bañ mooy seen doom yi suñ ñëwee report rape ngeen dem police ba ngeen a dem di report yi xëy na kër rape seen doom yi suñ ko waxee police bi turam dina ko xam dangaa gis ne police bi du si am ité o duñ investigate sax because police ba ka nga dem di report yi xëy na kooku mbokkam la moo tax ma ne Gambia should designate, maybe they do have it, maybe I don't know. There should be a specific hotline to report sexual assault and rape. Thank you. And let's say no to rape. You see, our mothers are being raped. Our sisters are being raped. Our daughters are being raped. Let's get these criminals where they belong. Let's get them reported to the authorities and we take them to jail. You see, sleeping with a minor, ku amut 18 fukki at ak juróom ñetta su waxee ne bugana bugut waruloo egg si kawam soo ko defee crime nga def lu wrong nga def te danga tëddi kaso. So step back, stay away from these minors, otherwise you will go to mile 2. Period. No compromises.
Good day, Gambia. My name is Tyflo. I am here to lend my support and to stand with the various women, the numerous women in Gambia that have gone through rape, through molestation, through abuse. I call on all women in the Gambia to stand, to leave something for our generations to be proud of. We have gone through a lot. We have gone through trauma in Gambia, but that does not mean that we should leave our women, the most vulnerable, to keep on going through this trauma. We must stand up now. We must do something now. We must start the conversation and back it up with actions now. The time is now. We don't have the time to wait anymore. We must do something now. Thank you.
Welcome back to Paradise TV on this discussion and breaking the silence on rape and violence against women in the Gambia. And I'm joined by three ladies, all of whom experts in their own rights. Ms. Jama Jack, Bafu Jeng, and Jaha Dukure. And we're going to steal some time from the news team. We're meant to be out of here in 2 minutes. But definitely we will not be here in 2 minutes. We cannot be here. We cannot be out of here in 2 minutes, definitely. So, Bafu, we're coming to you. Last question, and then we'll do the closing for everybody. Maybe get 2-3 minutes so that we could close the conversation today. But we're coming back to you and looking at society. Mothers, fathers, uncles. In the beginning of this conversation, we talked about early marriage and forceful marriage at that. And we know for sure, mostly, your father negotiates with his friend at a bantaba, probably the day when you were born, that my child will be your wife. And a child is already committed to a marriage she's not aware of. 10 years later, 15 years later, this becomes true. And the child is bound by that. And we have seen some family members who will collect monies over several years before the child will mature. And you become some sort of a domestic slave. Now, are you at the level of the ministry aware of this? If yes, what are we doing?
Yes, of course, not only at the level of the ministry, but at the level of government. That is referred to as child betrothal. And it's under the same category as child marriage. When we talk about child betrothal, it's where in the world of language, it's very common. You go to other places, they call it other different names. But at the end of the day, it amounts to a child being, being a subject of child marriage. Because child betrothal is one of the root causes of child marriage. That child that is betrothed at birth, that child that is betrothed after 2 years, that child that is betrothed after 2 years or betrothed at birth, you will see that before she reaches 13 years, before she reaches 15 years, she will be set for marriage. And that is one of the reasons why the Children's Act has identified as an offense, and anybody who's found wanting can be prosecuted, and if found guilty can be convicted for up to 20 years. But then the issue lies in not about the laws being in place, but are we getting reports of such cases? We do not deny that it's happening, but then are they coming forward? Like I said earlier with respect to the child marriage cases, sometimes you get to know that the child has been taken off for marriage by the school teacher. And that's where you see that the school teachers are doing very well in that from education, they're supporting the police in that. They will get to know through the friends what happened to A, B, C. Oh, she's not coming to school because she's going to get married. And then the teachers will know that this child is not supposed to get married because she's under 18, and then they will alert the authorities through the police or Department of Social Welfare. So basically, I'm not denying that it's happening, but the law is in place, and any person who is aware of this act being done on any child should report to the nearest authorities for justice to be done. It's an offense in the Gambia, it's categorically stated, it's in the Children's Act, and the laws are to be obeyed.
Okay, yes. One question before we go to the closing remarks. Why are we not putting systems in place to detect and not wait for somebody to make a complaint. Because in the cultures and in the areas where this is happening, it's already seen as normal, it's acceptable behavior. So they probably will not report themselves. I mean, shooting oneself in the foot, nobody will do that. So are we having mechanisms to detect that it's happening and then effectively enforce whatever the law would ask for?
Yes, I would not say that the mechanisms that we have, it's only about the advocacy we have in order to support the awareness raising in terms of the existence of these laws. But then is that kind of no, it's not enough. How do, as a victim or a child who is being subjected to marriage, what do you do? Who do you contact first? If you contact that person and they're not responding, who do you go to? There are issues, of course, and these are all evolving things that we need to look into as government. What do we need to put in place? But as a recent, like I said, the establishment or the establishment of the GBV helpline, the 1313, it's going to be one way in which any person who is aware of the existence of this, you can just call, because sometimes also what people are scared of is the close-knitted way in which our society is built. I know your family, she knows my family. If I should report about this, they will automatically know that I was the one that reported. And I wouldn't want them to know that I was, even though the law has created an umbrella section, we protect people that goes out to report. If you report on any child abuse case and the police officer or whoever, which authority you reported to, revealed your name, you can take that officer to court. That provision is there. Are people aware of it? They need to know. And also, now that we have this 1313, any person who is aware, you can just call free from whatever network you have. And then those people will now contact the nearest police officers and they will take it up. And then they will do what is supposed to be done. We do not have the effective mechanism in place. But then these are all ways in which we can evolve. Because, like you said, we have to work with the civil societies. Government alone cannot do it. We will work hand in hand with them in order, and also work with the community.
This government alone cannot do it. We are getting tired of it. Government alone cannot do it. Government alone cannot do it.
No, let me tell you why.
And government alone takes our taxes. Government alone does the thing. And the things the government is interested, government does every day.
No,
and government alone comes only when you are not doing the thing.
No. These are social issues we need to put into consideration. Remember, when we talk about child marriage, these are things that people really ascribe. Some of them they ascribe it to religion, others they ascribe it to their cultures. So if government is now coming to tell them that you are not allowed to send your child, a 15-year-old child, to marry, those people will be fighting government. They will not even want to listen to government because who is government?
And then you'll be worried about your vote.
Exactly. Anyways, see, let me tell you.
You're not a politician, I know.
Yes, thank you. But then the issue is the interference that we've been talking about. I just want to take this opportunity to say that the interference comes from all levels. We've seen family interference, the friends, the imams, the alcalos, the chiefs, people coming up to beg, to ask you. But I think that's also where the advocates and the activists will step in. Reinforce the advocacy, because we need to sit people down. We need to all join hands to explain these things to them. Let them understand the psychological consequences that comes with sexual violence. Let them know that it's not about the family name. Let them know that it's about this child who's been victimized. And then while government, while at the Ministry of Justice, we concentrate mostly on the perpetrators, you can also support us in terms of trying to support the victims. And that's where we collaborate, that's where we join hands together. And like I said, sometimes the interference, you see family members switching off their phones, moving out of their locations, just so they would not come to court to testify. Because what? The perpetrator is my nephew. Because what? The perpetrator is the uncle. Because what? The perpetrator is the shopkeeper that's living at my house. So these are the things that we see. What do? We all need to make sure that we call them out.
Yep.
The man should be acting as the he for she of every woman.
Yep.
Let the men be there to support us now. Let women also stand for each other. And then through that, the laws will be enforced and the women and children of the Gambia will be protected.
Would be protected. Mrs. Jama Jack, we're going to give you 2 minutes closing statements. We are into borrowed time now.
I think for me it's simple. We've spent about 2 hours and I think we have not even gotten into the depth of these issues. We have not spoken about the many different stories we hear about. We have not spoken about our own stories. We have not spoken about the things that we see around us. But like we said, the conversation continues. It is always going on. There are some of us who do not stop at all, at the expense of a lot of things, at the expense of a lot of character assassination, a lot of labeling that we have to deal with. And that is where I think I want to come in. A lot of the time as well, we're just talking about the perpetrator. Yes, we want justice. But I think it is also high time that we try to think about what support we're rendering to the victims and the survivors. And this is also a responsibility of the government. We can do what we can. We pull from our pockets, our little 1,000, 2,000 to pay for medical support, to pay for a counseling session. It is not sustainable. We cannot do it for every single victim or survivor in this country. So when we're talking about the mechanisms to respond, it goes beyond just what happens at the courts. Whether you convict or dismiss a case, the child is, or the person is going to live with their experience. We must ensure that whatever mechanisms we are creating also factor in the well-being of the people that are affected. Also factor in the support that they need to get on that journey of healing. And that whatever mechanism is in place works, because that is very important. The other point I want to make, we have cases right now that have a lot of attention on them. I am calling on the media. I'm actually just pleading because we have seen what has happened in the past few days. I am pleading with you to sit with your conscience and ask yourself why you are not interested in these cases, and to come out and support these victims, and to shine a light on what is happening in the courts, to make sure there is consistent reporting on the sitting so that people know what is happening and are able to follow the case. So this is a plea from me. My third point goes out to women. The feminists are not your enemies. We are on the same side. We're fighting for our own liberation. We are not your enemies. The enemies are the people who continue to fight us. They're the ones who continue to violate our rights, and that's where we need to direct our energy. We must create the space to be able to listen to one another. I'm coming to the religious leaders, the opinion leaders, the traditional leaders. They have a critical role to play in this. They have a critical role to play in the sense that their opinion influences in our communities. The religious leaders are the ones who translate our religious texts. We understand, we know in this country it's men, mainly, who handle that responsibility. And a lot of the time the interpretation is done in a way that suits them. We need to be able to have religious leaders who are there to translate the religious text in the very way that promotes the rights of people, like we know our religion does. We talked about child marriage, for example, and people always say this is religious, let's marry them off clearly. But one of the most fundamental principles around marriage is consent. And Islam does not recognize a marriage where consent has not happened. And a lot of the child marriages we see, a child cannot consent in the first place. So it is not happening. So we need the opinion leaders, the traditional leaders, to step up and lead conversations in their communities, because people listen to them. And to the men, especially those who perpetuate these crimes, especially those who perpetuate these crimes. It is just to put you on notice that you can employ all tactics, but that is not going to stop us. We are at a point where there's no going back. I'll give an example. Today we were on a webinar discussing how men can play a role with regards to ending sexual violence. We had men who logged into this call and were masturbating on that call.
I saw
that is what we had to deal with. 3 times, and they were sending me private, because with Zoom you can send a private message to an individual, sending me private message and saying, just watch me jerk off. That is the cost we pay for being visible, for being loud, for speaking about these things. We don't enjoy it. Sometimes we sit and our inboxes are filled with people just throwing their stories at us, and we have to deal with that while also dealing with our own trauma. So to the men we are saying, you can try all the different methods you want, and the women who support them, but that is not going to stop us. And the last one is for us, all of us who believe in this cause. We must stay the course. We must ensure we do not give up. It is a difficult road. It is going to get even tougher, especially when we start to see people with power being called out, because so many of them are protected. It is going to get tougher. There's going to be so much at stake. But we must always think about who is affected by this protection. When we protect violators of human rights, who are we betraying? Who is suffering? That's what we need to think about, and to stay the course. And for me, I have come to the resignation that this is the work that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It is what I have done forever. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And unless we see a change, unless we get to that point of liberation, we must stay the course and deal with whatever comes. The last point, my last statement, is that shame belongs to the person who has violated their rights. Because sometimes we try to shame victims. We accuse them, we shame them. Shame belongs to the one who has violated their rights. For some of us, we can no longer be shamed because we are shameless. But shame belongs to the people. We must be able to shame the people who engage in these acts and have them understand you're the only person who should be ashamed. And make victims feel like they can depend on us. They can depend on the systems, and they will be protected. And this includes protecting their identity, protecting their well-being, ensuring they are safe, and giving them the support that they need. The conversation continues, the work continues. We hope more people get on board because this is about all of us.
It's about all of us. Jaha, closing statements?
I think Jama said everything that I could have said, and she nailed every single point that any one of us could have raised when it comes to sexual violence in this country. I just say that the work continues and the conversations continue. And I do want to say a huge thank you to you, Haruna, for creating this platform and allowing us to just begin this conversation at a national level, because I think it's an important step, and it's a step in the right direction. So I am extremely honored to have been here and to share this platform with these two amazing women who are doing everything within their own fields to make sure not only our survivors are supported, but justice is served. And as someone who recently became an international spokesperson for L'Oreal, I want to also use that platform to push companies to do more when it comes to, especially being that their clients are women. And if you're selling exclusively to women, you should contribute to that fight. So for me, that's one of the reasons why I think I'm very happy that I have this new platform in order to be able to do more, not only for my community, but as well as the women that I serve.
Thank you. Bafu, Jang, can you also close in statement?
Thank you very much, Haruna, and thank you to my co-panelists as well. I just wanted to say that this is indeed a welcome move, and we hope other media houses will also follow suit, because, of course, government cannot do it alone. Let's just take that. It's the reality on the ground. Government needs government cannot do it alone. Hashtag government cannot do it alone. Everybody has to play their role, and then together we will see the work done. And like I said, has already been established. SGBV, we have not even touched SGBV. All that we've been talking about here is just on the surface. Yeah. So we really welcome more platforms like this in order to really advocate and also express the situation as it is right now in the country. And thank you very much once again on behalf of the Ministry of Justice.
Thank you very much, ladies. It has been wonderful to have you. Jama Jack, thank you. Bafujeng, thank you. Jaha Dukure, thank you very much. And for us at Paradise TV, this is the beginning of the conversation. It has been a long journey for most of you, if not all of you here. This is your daily life. This is the daily commitment that you've made to yourself and to our children and to other women like yourselves. And we want to say congratulations to you and thank you for educating us. And as far as we are concerned here at Paradise TV, you would have our platform, you would have access to our platform. Any of you in particular, if you're going to talk about welfare of our children, girls. I am passionate about that as a person, and I believe the future can only be better if we build them now, if we groom them well, if we give them access, if we create the opportunities, if we create a platform for them. The change that we want cannot happen without that. And I want to encourage you to continue to do this. Knock on our doors anytime you like. We will be here. And to my fellow men around the country, it's time that we listen. It's time that we learn, if necessary, unlearn some of the things that we believe is true. It's time that we participate and know that one half of a whole public cannot be left behind if we want to grow like other nations, if we want to go into places we need to be in. And responsibility begins with each of us as individuals. What we say all the time I love my mother. I love my sisters. Oh my God, my daughter is everything to me. If we look at every daughter, the age of ours, with the same eye, same love, same affection, if we look at every mother, the way we look at our mothers, if you look at every sister, same way we look at our sisters, most of what we were talking about today would not happen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. The conversation continues. Have a good evening.
As the coronavirus spreads worldwide, we at Bell Aqua would like to encourage everyone to 1. Wash your hands thoroughly and often. 2. Avoid touching your mouth, nose and eyes. 3. Exercise social distancing. 4. Avoid large crowds where possible. 5. When you feel feverish or unwell, please visit the nearest health facility or call the emergency line 1025 from any network. This message is brought to you by Bell Aqua Purified Water. Drink pure, live safe.
mbir mi tànn sa bu la neex la te boo tànnee li gën sax jóge si bépp boor te comme que lii ma tànn mooy li gën moom it saa su ne lépp lu muy tànn rekk mooy li gën cey sama bi